Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We got a book to talk about this time. It's called The Six Pack. Oh, I like a good six-pack. You know what I like? Carling Black Label. In fact, I'll go for one right now. Baby doll, get me a Carling Black Label. Wait a minute. I can't do this without... Hey! Get me that... Oh, no! That one hurt. I guess I'll do without the beer. But you'll have to do with... It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Soon to be available on cassette. Hello, everybody. It's Bob Smith from PWI back when Methuselah was a young boy, and this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We got a good one for you this time. It's Brad Balukjian. He's the author of one of the year's most talked about wrestling books called The Six Pack. On the Open Road in Search of WrestleMania. It's a tremendous piece of work. I would not lie to you guys. I'm very selective with who I let on as authors on this show, and I will tell you what. I've never read a wrestling book like this one. I can't give it higher praise. This year, when they go to select the book of the year, this one's going to be high on many people's lists. It's that good. And it's an interesting author, interviewing interesting wrestlers, and we'll get right to talking about that in just a couple of moments. We'll do our usual WrestleCopia lineup of fantastic shows, and then we'll get right to the talk with Brad. Also on October 13th, I will be at the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame ceremony in Albany, New York. You can come join us. We would love it if you would come join all of us who are going to be there. It's my first time visiting. It's going to be my first time taking part in this, and I'm really looking forward to it. They got a spectacular dinner set up, as well as, the inductions, and a whole lot of fun, both at the hotel where the dinner is going to be, plus at the MVP Arena where they're going to show the plaques off, and we can all meet, mingle, have a nice time. So in any event, it's real easy to find it. In any event, there's also some events taking place the day before and after, so you can make a whole weekend of wrestling up in Albany, New York. It's the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and to get all the details, ProWrestlingHall.net. Just all you need, ProWrestlingHall.net. We had Seth Turner on talking about this. I can't wait to get up there again, see some friends, both in and out of the wrestling business, and it should be a stone cold blast. So come on up. I think it's going to be well worth your time. We'll be right back with Brad Balukjian and The Six Pack, a tremendous wrestling book. I mean, would I lie? No, I mean, seriously, would I lie? Is that your opinion of me? You think you know some people. Well, it's sort of kind of been in the news lately. We want you to know all about it. Recently, the Outdated Wrestling Hour podcast with Bob Smith has joined the WrestleCopia podcast network. I'm really glad to be part of this team, and you can hear the podcast virtually anywhere the podcasts are offered. Such great shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, Regional Wrestling, is the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Rube. Gene Jackson's another great host. You can hear him on the Retro Wrestling Review, which looks back at the classic days of USWA, and the brand new show, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert, featuring, well, Doug Gilbert, one of the great Memphis wrestlers of all time. Also on the WrestleCopia podcast network, Dave Dynasty and his long-standing hit podcast, Wrestling Nostalgia, featuring an A-list bunch of professional wrestlers you never know who you're going to hear speaking with Dave. And of course, a serious bent on the WWA, and I love that. There's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan Giannetti as they travel back in time to discuss the history of wrestling in Japan. Through the decades, not just recently. You're going to want to check out that show. Monday Warfare, Raw vs. Nitro, looks at, well, the classic Monday Night Wrestling Wars. The Other Ship podcast describes itself as a pop culture podcast with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, TV, food, and of course, wrestling. How can you beat that? And they got a whole mess of great special guests, too. Also on the WrestleCopia podcast network, you're going to want to check out The Captain's Corner, GrappleCon, TR Shocks the World, WCNN News, and a whole lot more. You'll never know what you're going to hear on the WrestleCopia podcast network. Well, how do you find all this stuff, right? Simple. Start out by just logging on to WrestleCopia.com and let them take you on that ride, baby, to pro wrestling old and new. Well, it's author time here again at the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and we've got a good one here. One of the most talked about wrestling volumes of this calendar year of 2024 is a book called The Six Pack, Out on the Open Road in Search of WrestleMania. You will never read anything quite like this book. It's a unique tale told by a unique writer. It's Brad Balukjian. Hi, Brad. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
And listen, you've done a lot of podcasts up to this point. And the fact that you reached out and said you want to come on my show, you floored me, because it's like I thought by now you'd been on the Cornettes and all the big time sluggers of the wrestling podcast world. So I was really pleased when you decided to reach out. I've got a bunch of questions for you, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I've always, with both of my books, tried to say yes to everything, and definitely appreciate. It doesn't, whether someone has an audience of 1 million or 100. That's, if someone's passionate about my work and wants to chat about it, I try to make it happen.
Sure. I go on everybody else's podcasts all the time myself. I've gone on the highest rated shows and some that you're recorded with a cup and a string, those type of podcasts. But I don't care. It just helps spread the word and builds goodwill and what have you.
Right.
So how's it going? How's it going with the book? It's gotten a lot of talk, and I want you to know that I'm 3/4 of the way through it. And if it ends the way I think it will, you got a Wrestling Book of the Year contender on your hands, because everybody who has read it that I know really, really liked it. I've had other journalists and podcasters say you really ought to get Brad on your show. So you came with guns a-blazing, and I think you got a shot at being Book of the Year. I really do.
Well, thank you. And, it's one of the nice compliments I've had in this process since the book came out is hearing from wrestling journalists that really appreciated it, like it, whether it's Brian Solomon or Dave Meltzer or Tim Hornbaker or some of these people. I mean, I don't identify as a wrestling journalist because I'm not a wrestling journalist.
Right.
I'm a writer who's interested in wrestling and wanted to do a wrestling project and hopefully did the industry justice. But just like with my book, The Wax Pack, I'm not a baseball writer, but I wrote a book about baseball. And so when the people who really do this work in and day out, who cover the industry, when they have nice things to say, that is really flattering, because I get that when you're not in that industry and that's not your beat, there's a certain suspicion that people have, like, who is this guy? He's an entomologist. Why is he coming in here writing about wrestling? Like, why should I listen to this guy? He's got no street cred in the business. I totally get that perspective. And that's why when I wrote this, I tried to be as respectful as I could to the people I was interviewing and to the subject matter, while at the same time honoring my job as a journalist to pursue the truth, right? And we all know that pursuing truth in a project about pro wrestling is very, very challenging.
Oh, absolutely it is. because I come from the kayfabe era when I was writing for the magazines. I'd say 40% of everything I wrote was made up nonsense, and the rest of it was actual journalism. I'll tell you something. Early 90s at PWI, we had writers who had experience with real newspapers and real magazines. Like I had won a couple of awards for. I covered Mike Tyson's early boxing career, and that
Oh,
helped me
wow.
get the job. Obviously,
Where were you writing about that?
Catskill, New York, when he was training with Kevin Rooney and Customato in the early days.
Were you like the local?
I was local sports editor, yeah, in the
Wow.
newspaper, the local newspaper, and made my career, man. That was the fluky thing. I mean, literally, our office was directly across the street from the Catskill Boxing Club where the Tyson would work out, and I had carte blanche to walk over there and say hello anytime I wanted. And one thing led to another, and got a job working for boxing and wrestling magazines. So it's
Huh.
fate can be a wonderful thing. It could
What?
suck, but it could be a wonderful thing too.
When did you first start writing for a wrestling mag? Like, what year was that?
Oh, I started in 1988 with PWI right off the bat.
Mhm.
Right off the bat. They were I answered a two-line ad in the New York Times, and they called me within 2 days, and I had a job within 5 days. So it was like I must have been doing something right. I had won a couple of major journalism awards, which didn't hurt.
Yeah, yeah. Do you still have like a lot of your old notes and materials, or is that all gone?
You know something? I have 5 magazines, and I probably was part of 2000 magazine. I'm serious. I don't know why. It was a situation. Nah, it's boring. I won't tell you why I left the company. I didn't. I wasn't fired, and I didn't leave. They moved.
Mm,
It was 1992. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. There's no. You had to be in an office to have a job like that. I couldn't do it from somewhere
right,
else.
right, right,
So that was the end of my career with that company. But because I couldn't move, I had just bought property and all that kind of thing. So that's all it was. I'd probably, well, I can say I'd probably still be there to this day, but again, it wasn't an acrimonious parting of the ways. It was just cruel, cruel fate. Best
right.
job, and to this day, the best job I ever had. It really was.
Nice.
It was great. But wrestling was different then, and it was the reason I like your book so much is that you were part of, even though the WrestleMania, like your book kind of focuses on December 26, 1983, which is the day that Hogan beat the Iron Sheik for the.
Or no, Sheik beats Backlund.
Oh, excuse me, right. It's the Sheik Backlund match,
Hmm.
which is just a month or two before the Hogan match. That's right. So, but still, that's my jam. That was my era. That's the stuff I watched shortly before I got a job with the magazines. And obviously, it was your jam too, because according to the book, you got hooked, and the hooks went deep. Am I reading that correctly?
Oh yeah, as a little kid growing up in Rhode Island, I was the kid watching on Saturday mornings, and Saturday night's main event. The VCR was set. I played with the action figures, which was so great that I got to put those action figures on the cover of the book. I was really happy with how that turned out. And so from an early age, I was really into pro wrestling, WWF. That was my territory. And and I was a huge Iron Sheik fan, which was definitely not common back in the mid '80s.
No, I mean, he was one of the most despised bad guys. I'll use that term because that was the term back then. One of those despised bad guys in the entire wrestling industry. Everybody hated his shtick. And why did you like him?
I know. This is like, I'm sure I could probably get a whole army of psychologists to try to figure that out. I think that it was as simple, when you're like 5 years old, it's amazing what jumps out at you. It's not the things that jump out at us as adults. It's really often quirky, weird, simple things like the Iron Sheik's mustache and his weird boots. Just something about his presentation was very cartoonish, and I kind of liked it. And then I think it was also that I was always drawn to the not following the crowd, right? So the fact that he was this heel that nobody liked made him appealing to me.
I get it. But you know what? I was around at the time when he first joined the WWF as the great, terrible name, the great Hussein Arab of Iran, which nobody could pronounce. Gary Capetta could barely say it as a ring announcer. But when he grabbed the mic, late in his life when he was on the Howard Stern show, everybody used to laugh at him just going off. He became a star in Howard Stern for years just by ranting. But even those earliest interviews on the stick, holy mackerel, is he funny.
Yeah.
It wasn't just USA number 1 or Iran number 1, USA Pak Patui, He was really funny. "Where is Bruno? I've been here 9 months. Where is Pedro? Where is blah, blah, blah." He was great on the mat. He was
Well,
just very believable too.
one thing I put in the book that I thought was interesting is that if you actually translate what he's saying in Farsi, especially around like 83, 84,
Mhm.
he's actually not very heelish at all. He's basically saying, I come from the oldest country in the world, Iran, and we have great wrestling champions like Gola Reza Takti, and so it's interesting that the message back then, just by being from Iran, you were despicable,
Oh, but
even if what you're saying was not at all heelish.
that was pro wrestling from the '50s on. I hate to say this, but
Well,
it's the
yeah,
stone cold truth. They're German, boo, and of course they weren't even real Germans. You're Japanese, boo. You're from wherever, boo. That's all it took. I mean, in the early '70s, there was a tag team called the Love Brothers that used to come out and unfurl a peace flag. Boo, dumb, dirty hippies. It's if you were different, if you were the other, you were despised in wrestling.
right,
And I hate to
yeah,
say it, but
yeah,
that's what was going on.
yeah, yeah,
So, but the Sheik was different. The Sheik had an edge to him, unlike any other heel of that era, because there was something really playful underneath all that. Did you get that vibe too? Even if he's disparaging the USA and climbing the turnbuckles and shaking a fist, there was something fun-loving in those actions that he was taking. Because you know what? I
yeah.
think I think the minute he determined that he was getting over, he went with it.
Yeah, I think the fact that he really was from Iran gave him a
Yeah.
sense of authenticity. He had a real accent. He really spoke Farsi. So unlike other characters that played these foreign heels, he was the real deal. And then I think there was a playfulness to Khosrow Vaziri. I mean, he loved children, he loved kids. He really despised any kind of cruelty. And so I think when you look at even back then, like the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, people liked the Iron Sheik more because he had sort of more charisma in that
Mhm.
role.
Mhm.
And you could just tell that, again, yeah, he had that underlying humor. I think it was the drugs that ruined his career and his life for a long time, because if he had steered clear of that, the real guy, Khosrow Vaziri, was a really impressive person.
He really was. I worked with Bill Apter, who you probably know, and Bill loved the guy. He thought he was just a wonderful human being. Because he went back to the AWA days, and his first matches, he was, I think, presented as sort of a collegiate champion type wrestler. Am I remembering that
Yeah,
correctly?
he would wrestle as Ali Vaziri or
Mhm.
Khosrow Vaziri. You wear a singlet and a clean cut baby face.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's why he became the Iron Sheik, is because he wasn't getting over. And he basically went to Vern Gagne and said, can I please turn heel because this isn't working?
Mhm. And boy, did it work. Something, nobody was more surprised than I was when he won the championship for Backlund. Because he'd been around, he had an earlier stint as the Great Hussein, and this was the second stint, and he had been beaten before, by Backlund, I believe. So when he came back and took the gold, I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
How
No
did
one
you
saw.
how did you feel at that time when you saw him win the belt?
Well, I was like 3 years old, but
Oh, okay.
I can say that from what I've read and researched, I think that it was just stunning because, like you said, he lost to Backlund in June of 1979 in Madison Square Garden. He was kind of recycled, brought back. He lost to Backlund clean in the Spectrum in November of '83.
Mhm.
So why would he be any imminent threat a month later? I'm sure people thought, oh, he's the flavor of the month. He's going to lose, and then we're going to go on to the next heel. Uh, and so, yeah, what a great surprise.
Well, there was a little bit of a telegraph the previous month at Madison Square Garden when I believe Backlund took on Masked Superstar before that
Hmm.
and got hurt. He hurt his back or something. I don't remember what part of his body. And he was kind of favoring that, I think, going into the match against
That's right. Well,
Sheik.
also because they shot the angle where the Sheik attacked him doing the clubs.
Right, right, that too. Right. but I think it all melded together, at least for Garden fans, who were there. And I wouldn't say telegraph is the right word. There's just hints that there were chinks in Backlund's armor, I think, at that point.
Right.
And of course, wasn't all that long after, here comes the new concept for a world champion, which was Hulk Hogan, totally unlike any champion they ever had in WWF before that. Um, history in wrestling. I mean, it may have been the biggest win of the 1980s for any particular professional wrestler when Hogan beat the Sheik.
I mean, I would argue that you can draw a line from the WWE being an $8 billion company today to that match.
Oh, sure. It's a point you make very well in the book, too, because you know what? All of a sudden, it was big time. It felt different. It was presented differently. It was more colorful, more lively, younger. The vibe was changing instantly. I mean, 2 years before that, you had Bulldog Brower and Sweet Hansen in main events.
Right.
You cut to 1983, and you have totally new faces taking the top spots. It had to be done. And I think McMahon was brilliant in that regard.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't feel that the age old argument of, who was more important, Vince or Hogan. And I don't think there's a clear cut answer because I don't think Vince could have done it without Hogan.
Yeah, shoot. Hogan leaving the AWA practically put Vern Gagne out of business. So, it's like a double-edged sword. He had to leave one place to get to come back to the WWE. And I remember when he brought him back, he was Hogan's pal for about 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
They came back, and I think the Samoans were in the ring or somebody, and here comes Backlund with Hogan. Oh, he's back. He's a changed man.
Right.
And that's all it took. That's all it took.
Yeah.
Well, Hogan had that unique charisma. And he attracted kids. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Hogan is another person you came in contact with during your travels for this book. I don't want to detail too much because I want people to go and buy it and read it, obviously.
Thank you.
But also, you went on a journey, a long journey, going back to find wrestlers who were on the card.
Right.
That December 26, 1983 card. And you found a whole mess of them.
Yeah, that was the conceit, was because I had this personal backstory with the Iron Sheik where I had tried to write his biography in 2005, and that went totally sideways. And so in 2022, the idea was, okay, I'm going to go on the road for the whole summer and try to find the Iron Sheik again, but also the other guys that were there the night he became the champion. So Tony Atlas and the Masked Superstar and Sergeant Slaughter and Tito Santana, Hulk Hogan. Well, Hulk Hogan wasn't there that night, but the following month. And so, yeah, that's the premise of the book, is to find these guys now and sort of tell the story of what happened to them, but also the extent to which they became their characters. So the reason why I titled every chapter as the person's real name versus their stage name is to get at that duality that each of these guys had. So Hulk Hogan versus Terry Bollea, or Merced Solis versus Tito Santana.
I found part of the book from a personal standpoint really riveting, especially when you talked to Tony Atlas and found Tony Atlas, and he had a belt around his waist, yet he was homeless at the same time, which knocked me down.
Right. Oh, back in '89, yeah.
Tony is one of the nicest people I ever met in the sport, to be honest with you. I mean, he could be a little hot-headed at times, but I did a lot of literal work with him. I was doing interviews and color commentary for IWCCW, which was the Savoldi group that he had the belt with.
Right.
And during that period, he treated me like gold, and we hit it off pretty well. I'm going to see him again in a few weeks. Tony was a nice man who got some bad breaks, and you soon find out when you leave an organization like the WWF. Sometimes there's no place to go. I'm sure you found out as well that it's really rough when they come crashing down.
Well, right, because that's what happened between like 84 and 89 or so, right? Is that by the time the guys that I wrote about were winding down, the territory system was basically dead. And so the territory system was really good for the boys, right? It was really good for the workers because there was competition. Even if there was kind of a pseudo monopoly with the NWA, you had the AWA, you had the WWF, and guys would rotate in and out. I mean, even now, although conditions are certainly better. Wrestlers don't have the schedule that they did back in the 80s. They have better, they don't, I mean, they're still classified as independent contractors, but they have some better working conditions. If they're not working for WWE or AEW, there's not a lot of options. So
No, it's really not.
I think the industry, I mean, I think where wrestlers have made a good adjustment is that most of them now see themselves beyond being a wrestler. They see their potential to be a social media influencer. They see their potential to be in Hollywood. They see that the diversified media ecosystem gives them some leverage beyond just being a wrestler. And even though there's more reform that I think can be done within the wrestling industry to help the labor, I think wrestlers have finally taken some initiative that they don't have to be completely at the whim of the promoter.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. You know, when I was with the magazines in the 80s and 90s, they worked those guys to death. And I'm not even talking about the extraneous things like steroids and drug use and things like that. I mean, there were guys doing double shots constantly. Like we're talking afternoon and evening spots 5 hours away. You probably encountered a lot of that when you were traveling around too. They really used to have to bust their butts to make a living, even though at times they're making a good living.
Yeah, it was insane. I mean, the schedule in like the late 80s WWF, there's nothing crazier than like WWF 1985 to 1992, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
They had 3 tours, maybe even 4 at some time, and just an insane work schedule for those guys. And almost all of them suffered for it.
Yes. I hate to admit that, but you're right. When you said almost all of them, yeah, they did. If it wasn't physical, it could be psychological. You know, they miss their families and things like that. That's why I've always had such respect for pro wrestlers because I talk about it on this show constantly. Like I was around a lot of young guys just breaking into business at that point when I was working at the magazines, and you have to give up everything. At least then, you had to give up everything to learn and become a professional wrestler. And just then you hit out into the territories hoping to get a spot for $50, 10 states away from where you grew up. And I'm not even exaggerating any of this. It was much harder than being a baseball player or football player. You know, you can get drafted in those sports. In wrestling, you have to convince somebody you're worth, putting into a ring.
Right.
But what's harder than that? I mean, it had to be just so daunting.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's very few. I mean, I think most successful pro wrestlers, like the guys I wrote about, don't regret things, but I think they also would not say it's a very kind business.
Oh, you could be fired at any promoter's whim or get into a backstage scuttlebutt with somebody, then you're out. You know, it's stuff, you don't even see it coming and it happens. You know, I was just talking to an old timer on the previous show I did who got fired for no reason at all.
Mm-hmm.
The promoter just walked in and fired him. He said, "You were with that guy. You weren't supposed to be there. You're out." And that was it, because there was always somebody to take their place. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we talked about. The wrestlers who you talked to, Sergeant Slaughter, another gentleman of the ring who was, I think he's made up better than a lot of them have in terms of longevity, good health, and good spirits. What was it like speaking with him?
Well, so part of I think the appeal of the book is that I actually didn't get to chat with all of the people I wanted to.
Okay.
And so Bob Remus, Sergeant Slaughter, that chapter is about my attempt to talk to Sergeant Slaughter.
Really?
Yeah. But so I went to Eden Prairie, Minnesota, where he grew up, and I interviewed his high school football coach and met people he went to high school with. And that chapter even culminates with me going to his house in North Carolina and knocking on his door. And so I'll let the readers discover what happens there. But yeah, Bob didn't want to talk to me, and I get into that in the chapter, and I think it was largely because he probably knew that I was going to ask him about not serving in the military, and that was something where he had until after my book came out, he had never publicly admitted that he didn't serve, and there were all these articles and everything pointing out that he had not served. And and he just refused to address it. And so there was a lot of negative publicity around that and stolen valor and that sort of thing. And so he probably didn't talk to me because he was worried I would bring that up.
I'm shocked because I thought everybody knew he wasn't a real drill instructor. I did. I mean, even in the day, I thought, wrestlers would take guises.
Oh, yeah.
Other than Baron Mikel Cicluna, who really was from the Isle of Malta, I can't think of, Chief Jay Strongbow was Italian.
Right. But if you look at, I mean, there's a whole history of this with Bob Remus where he went on a show and he was talking, making up stories about Vietnam.
That's a whole different ball of wax. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there was like a very serious article investigated. People went to the United States government to filed Freedom of Information Act requests to look into this because he kept saying that he kept playing the character, living the character. So he was an exception, and like everyone else, like you said, a long time ago, let their guard down. But I think someone like, and I understand, he was dyed in the wool of kayfabe. You're trained to not even tell your wife that it's a work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to let go of that.
Well, and Tito Santana is someone else. I was really looking forward to reading about Tito because a lot of the guys from the 80s today tend to be somewhat standoffish. And how was your dealing getting around Tito?
Well, Tito was interesting. So his real name, Merced Solis, guy from Mission, Texas. I went down to Mission and met up with his cousin and retraced his whole childhood. And I should just tell listeners that this book is really about who these guys are as people. It's not about recounting old wrestling stories.
Right.
And so like for Tito Santana's chapter, I was getting into his relationship with his father, which was very fraught and very, they had a difficult relationship with one of his sons who was gay, and how they dealt with that, his father and son. And then recently the news came out that he had a daughter that he didn't know about. And so I get into all that. I asked Tito Santana about those things. And it was uncomfortable at times, but I found him to be very forthcoming and very honest. And but at the same time, both Tito and Tony Atlas were two guys that asked me to pay them to talk to them. And to your point about guys from the 80s being maybe more standoffish or aloof, I think a lot of the guys from that era understandably felt exploited. And so now they look at it like, hey, I've been exploited my whole career. I need to get paid for anything to do with my wrestling personality. And I explained to them, well, I can't pay my sources. That's not how journalism works. And they said, well, then I'm not going to talk to you. So I came up with a compromise, which was, okay, I will pay you, but I'm going to disclose that to the reader. I'm going to be above board about that. And so Tito was someone that wanted to get paid, and I paid him, but I also made sure to tell the reader that that was the arrangement.
But you made a good point. We'll back up just a half a step, because you did something that most wrestling books don't do in this book. Like you say, you looked into people's past, their lives, how they, things that most wrestling books don't touch. They'll tell you they won the NWA tag team title in 1981 or something like that, and list the in-ring accomplishments and where they worked. That's about as far as it gets. Your book is more personal. And it's more personal, not only on the perspective of the wrestlers, but you yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost a cathartic writing style that I have never really experienced in a wrestling book before. And I have to say, it was pretty pleasing. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I tried. My style of writing is often to include myself in the story where it's relevant, and to bring the reader with me, to show them, hey, like, this is so they can experience what I experienced when I met somebody and I talked to somebody. And again, I'm more interested in the humanity behind these guys and who the real person is. So with the Iron Sheik, for example, rather than go over the same ground again, I wasn't interested in talking about the Howard Stern stuff or any of that craziness. I went and found his actual coach, Alan Rice, who was the guy that the Iron Sheik first saw when he stepped off an airplane in 1969, flying one way to Minneapolis, not speaking a word of English. And he got to the airport in Minneapolis and he wandered around saying the name Alan Rice because he had met this guy at a international wrestling competition. And Alan Rice, who was the coach of the Minnesota Wrestling Club, amateur wrestling, coach of the 1972 U.S. Greco-Roman Olympic team, had told him, hey, if you ever come to the U.S., look me up. And so literally Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, that's what he did when he defected from Iran. He flew to Minneapolis, wandered around saying the guy's name until someone recognized him and called him up and said, hey, there's a crazy Iranian here saying your name. So I went and found Alan Rice at age 91 at a retirement home in Naples, Florida, and talked to him, right? Because I wanted to go to that extreme to really get at the backstory of these guys.
Talk about getting your fingernails dirty, man. I'm telling you, as a former newspaper writer and journalist in my early days, I'm listening to what you're saying. We got there was no stone you left unturned. I mean, you really did one heck of a job not only finding these people, but learning about them as well. The research had to be so from a writer's perspective. I don't know how long it took you to complete the book, but it seems like it's unbelievably detailed. I will say this much. To the point where I'm like, I forgot I was reading a wrestling book with my fingers and quotes in the air. So your journalism skills were on very good display in this particular volume. Like Brian Solomon, who you spoke with. Brian's book was different because he did this similar thing to what you did. It wasn't just a bunch of stats and figures and, I remember this match where he won a belt.
Yeah.
It was getting into the real lives of an enigma like the Sheik.
Yeah.
But all wrestlers are enigmas.
Yeah. Right.
Because a lot of them still have a little bit of a kayfabe chip on their shoulders, and they don't react to serious questions like most athletes do. Now, baseball. You know how baseball players act. Wrestlers are a whole different ball of wax. Am I right?
Yeah, well, they're both hard for different reasons. Wrestlers, in some ways, are more comfortable being interviewed because they were on camera all the time, and even if they were in character, they were always speaking, performing. Baseball players are notoriously told to never say anything interesting, right? It's the famous
That's right.
The famous Bull Durham scene where he says, all right, here's the 6 lines you need to say to the media, just give 110% and one day at a time. And so when I did the baseball book, I would often lead off when I would meet with a guy and say, look, I know you're trained to say nothing interesting. So I'm going to ask you some questions that are not the typical questions you've been asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they appreciated that candor. They were like, "Oh, yeah, you're right."
Well, if you're tipping your hat and saying I'm coming at you from a different perspective, they'll open up.
Yeah,
I mean, particularly veteran players, like legendary older players. I always found them far easier to interview than the current guys.
well, yeah, that's right. I don't even try to interview current stars, or athletes because they're not gonna go there.
I'm with you. I'm burnt out on it. I'm burnt out with the whole game of locker room protocols and things like that. I did get to cover baseball and basketball on a professional level for a while, and not as a full-time thing, but I had some experience at the arenas. It ain't easy because it's like even if it's a situation where you're going to talk about a matchup, a pitcher hitter or something like that. Sometimes if you hit too close to the bone and talk about something that wasn't exactly successful, they don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So you've been through those wars for sure. So now looking back at this book, I want people to discover it because you're going to get information here you're not going to get anywhere else. Not even close. Even when talking about people like Hogan and stuff like that, it's an entirely new, fresh perspective on wrestlers that all of my fans I know grew up watching.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I know. I for example, when you write a chapter about Hulk Hogan, right? Hulk Hogan's written 2 autobiographies. He's had numerous documentaries. He's a public figure. Everyone knows everything. They think they know everything about Hulk Hogan. So when I went in to write that chapter, I thought, what can I contribute that's going to be different and new about Hulk Hogan? So I went down to Tampa, Florida, and I tracked down some people that he was in a band with, the band Ruckus, back in 1973, because I had heard that name over and over in interviews, and everyone, okay, yeah, Hulk Hogan was a bass player, and he was in Ruckus and this and that, but no one had ever actually gone and like interviewed Ruckus. So I went and said, okay, I'm going to focus on two things in the Hulk Hogan chapter. Number one, his music career before wrestling and how that influenced him as a wrestler. And number two, did he actually have his leg broken by Hiro Matsuda when he started training? And so I went and found and talked to Jerry Briscoe about that, talked to Brian Blair about that. I went and found this guy, Danny Brower, who was best friends with Hulk Hogan or good friends with Hulk Hogan when they were like 10 years old and was actually his roadie in 1989 during the year when No Holds Barred came out and still had the receipts from the steroid shipments that went to his house for Hulk Hogan during that whole era. And so, yeah, like just people that you would never had really spoken about. Terry Bollea.
Incredible. I mean, how you came up with the people to contact is fascinating as actually contacting them. You know, it's like you went outside the lines to find people who would know him on a personal level as opposed to, you know, his valet who would bring his car around at the wrestling matches. And I think this is another reason why people need to read this book, because it's like, if I'm learning stuff and I was around during that era, everybody's going to learn stuff from your book.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do think that I put a focus on trying to break new ground. I mean, there's there's a whole chapter on the WWF and Vince McMahon where I went and found a lot of the people from the front office that again had not really spoken much about this. So Jim Troy, who was his second in command back in the early 80s, and Bob McMullen, who was the WWF CFO, who was one of the only people who could tell you that how much money Hulk Hogan made for WrestleMania 1, right? Other than Vince and Hulk. I talked to Nelson Sweglar in TV production and Tom Emanuel, the publisher of the magazine, and Edward Schutte, and all these people that, again, not really people that are often consulted when it comes to some of these projects.
It is amazing how the hierarchy of WWF, or whatever you want to call it, between 79 and about 84 completely changed. I mean, if you go back, it was like Gorilla Monsoon and Phil Zacco and all those people, and they're all gone.
Oh, yeah.
It was completely a complete and utter makeover of the entire company. Did you note that at the time when you're accumulating all these facts and figure how everything went, I mean, exploded around the time when the Iron Sheik match took place?
Yeah, I know. I tried to kind of tell that history in a succinct way of the turnover and what Vince was building, how he started in the Cape Cod Coliseum and started plotting, you know, with Linda and recruiting a team that would have this major turnover. And so, yeah, I do get, you know, I don't really go much past 1984, 85, but I cover a lot of that. And then, you know, there's a whole section about the Middle East tours that no one remembers and talks about from 83, 84, and some of the crazy things that happened on the airplane with Jimmy Snuka there and trying to attack or actually attacking one of the referees. So, yeah, there's a lot of new ground there.
There is, particularly the revelation that you bring out in the book. And I don't want to give away a lot of things in the book, but I think I can say this one. The fact that Vince Sr. was already out of the picture, but he was still there.
Right.
That was fascinating to me because nobody knew it. Literally nobody knew it. And I guarantee you the people like Bill Apter didn't know it either.
Right.
You know, so they kept that kind of on the QT, and it's fascinating to think that things were already changing before they started changing.
Right. Exactly.
In terms of presentation, bigger arenas, fancier production, and then
right, because
the growth. Yeah.
Vince Jr. bought the company in June of 82, and Vince Sr. was still pretty much superficially in charge until beginning of 84.
Right. I had no idea. No idea. Because I thought it was a clean split and then he just took over and then everything changed.
Right.
So it's a terrific book. Now I ask you the 800-pound gorilla question that I ask all the authors. Do you ever glance at today's stuff? Are you interested? Does it hold any favor to you? Do you not like it? How do you feel about today's stuff?
Yeah, I watch it occasionally. I was watching it more around WrestleMania this year. I haven't kept up with it recently. And I'll always find wrestling very entertaining and enjoyable, but I don't think that it's as enjoyable for me as what I grew up with. And some of that is probably just the classic everyone likes what they like when they were a kid. There's a bias there, no doubt.
This whole show is
Um,
based on the way you feel. It's the outdated. Outdated is another goofy word for classic, right?
sure.
Because I'm
Yeah.
older, I prefer the old stuff. So that's what this whole podcast is about. And that's why
But
your book is so perfect when you came on the show, is because you're looking back and you're looking back at the era where, well, that's when everything changed. The way it was presented, where it was held, the size of the arenas, the way it was broadcast, everything changed during the period that you wrote about in the book.
yeah, yeah. And I think today's wrestling though is too many high spots, too flippy. Um, I think it's like they've taken the importance of lesser moves out of it because they've just raised the bar to an unrealistic level.
Yeah, I agree. We talk about every week on the show. We use the word suspension of disbelief, and when it's too flippy, when there's too many high spots, when you can tell the match is just a series of high spots, and I'm not even talking WWE. We're talking AEWs as well. I mean, it looks just like, hey, ma, you're like the kid on the monkey bars. Look what I can do.
Right.
Rather than telling a story or building drama or building an athletic looking event rather than a staged one, and it bothers me.
Mhm.
It does.
Yeah, and I also think that there's very few characters that stand out to me anymore. I think the Attitude Era led to this realism in pro wrestling that for the time worked really well, where suddenly the gimmicks were just somebody's name and they were really good on the mic. And but the result of that is like everyone's sort of a generic wrestler now.
Yes, I was thinking that, yeah. Everybody has this a similar build, similar, move set, so to speak. I absolutely agree with that. They look like they're shot out of an injection mold a lot.
Which is, I
Um,
mean, I think there when you like, I like something like Gunter or
yes, yeah.
some of these characters that are there's still some that come out and really make a splash and they're distinct. And I think a lot of that is the people that are like that. It's somewhat of it's old school storytelling.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. I mean, I watch a lot of WWE still, and there's Gunther, who's so old school that he's new school. People
Mhm.
don't remember when wrestlers just kinda wrestled,
Right.
which makes him very, very attractive to someone like me, but then I'll watch that and feel really good about what I just saw, and then here comes the Wyatt Six, which looks like a bunch of horror monsters, and I'm like, I wanna throw my, New Balance right at my, OLED, so what can I tell you?
Right.
It's like you gotta take the good with the bad, but that's what wrestling is now. It tries to have a very wide palette of styles, and
Mhm.
sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So what's next for you? I mean, after the success, first of all, let's talk about the Wax Pack Sue. I do not mind talking about that on this show, for people who may not have heard of it. Explain what that is, what it's about, and I know a lot of our listeners are baseball fans. We end up talking baseball on the show far too often. So you might as well give that book a plug as well.
Yeah, well, the Wax Pack was my first book, and that came out in 2020. And the concept there was I got a pack of 1986 Topps cards that had never been opened, and I said, "All right, whoever's in this pack, I'm going to go track them down on a crazy cross country 11,000-mile road trip and tell the story of what happened to all these players." And so, as you might imagine, in a pack, you've got everyone from the scrubs to the Hall of Famers, and a good mix of people. So it's the story of that road trip journey.
That's for sure. Did you collect a lot of cards as a kid?
Oh yeah, that was I
Me
chose
too.
80. I chose 86 because that was the first year that I collected cards, and I have thousands of them, from those years.
Yeah, I was voracious when I was a little kid, and those wax packs, man, you would open them up, and you would have 5 of the backup shortstop of the Detroit Tigers long before you got the card you were really looking for. That was the fun of it, though, because it wasn't
Mhm.
all that expensive in those days.
Right, exactly. That's the era that I loved.
I walked into a convenience store just a few weeks ago. I said, maybe I'll buy a pack of baseball cards just to see what they're like. And I did, and I got a pack of 25 cards for $4.95. And I went, holy smokes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Certainly different times. The 50-cent packs are long gone.
You know what's really cool? When I was with the wrestling magazines, our art director was a guy named Ken Morgan, who, when the company kind of was sold, he went to work for Topps, which I
Hmm.
thought was the greatest segue you could ever
Yeah.
hope to have. It's kind of like the job that I have now. It's like it just worked. It's just something out there. You got touched by the fates, and you ended up doing a great job. And he was one of those brilliant art directors I knew. And I saw his work he did with Topps, and I was like, wow, he was the perfect choice. He's just a
That's
great,
great.
isn't that cool?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
listen, you're pretty cool too, and I'm really, really enjoyed meeting you. And the more I hear from you, the more I want to read. I want to tell the listeners the name of the book again. It's The Six Pack, Out on the Road in Search of WrestleMania with the Stars from 1983. A look back and a look forward, and it's personal from the wrestler standpoint and the author standpoint, which makes it a totally unique effort. Well worth your time. It's available in hardcover and soft color and Kindle edition and all that. Is there anything else you want to know? How can people get a hold of you, find out more about you, and learn more?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on. It's been fun to go over all this. So I'm on social media, Instagram, Twitter, at Brad Pack Books, and I'm at thebradpack.com, which is a unique thing where I've actually taken a lot of the deleted scenes and the documents that I uncovered in my book and the raw audio from my interviews and put it up on the website. I have a Patreon for that, and so encourage people if they really love the material and they want more of the really in the weeds wrestling stuff, they can find it on there.
Wow, that's really interesting. Any new projects you have sniffing around about? Could you kind of open the bag on that? Let us know, or is it too soon to say?
Well, no, I'm not doing any books. There's no books in the works right now. I'm still working on getting the word out about this book and
Hmm.
building my website, like I mentioned, putting new content, doing new interviews on there. So we'll see if the six pack can sell enough, it'll maybe make another book possible. So I'm hoping for that.
Well, listen, you've got the outdated seal of approval, that's for sure. I mean, it really is
Thank you.
unlike anything I've ever. And as a writer who was too lazy to write in my old age, I will say that no, and it's honestly that's the truth. I'm doing a little column with Bill Apter on his website, but that's about it these days. But I just want to say that what you've done is supersedes the usual idea of a wrestling journalist.
Mhm.
You've kind of I don't know, it's so intensely personal, not only the wrestlers' lives but your own, and it mixes perfectly. And I'm excited about this book, and I want my listeners to go out and grab a copy because you know what? If you want to really get down and learn things you don't know, this is the book. I'm
Mhm.
telling you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I hope, and please, people get in touch. Let me know what you think. I'd love to interact with readers.
There you go. You have a Gmail or anything like that? People can write to you, or
Yeah, so it's all on my website. I'm Balukjian at Gmail, thebradpack.com. Not hard to find my info.
what a revelation! Not only the book, but meeting you. It's like I am really sorry I didn't get my talons into you sooner because the book came out what in April or something like
In
that.
April, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I know that either I tried to get a hold of you, tried to get a hold of me, and we just didn't.
Right.
Something didn't happen. I don't know what it was, but I'm glad you were persistent, and I'm glad you're here now because it's like
Yeah.
this is about as good as it gets for somebody like me. Because I have
Great.
nothing but admiration for authors, and you're right up there, my friend. It's
Thank
going to
you.
be it,
No.
and I hope that
Thank you.
the end of this year brings you many accolades because you really deserve it.
Thank you. Yeah, let's keep in touch and to see where it goes.
You got it, folks. It's Brad Balukjian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, there's another one in the books. And we talked about a book. Get it? You get it? Great book, The Six Pack. I'm not wasting your time on this one. It will teach you things. It will open your eyes. It will make you aware of things you probably never even considered before. That is a rare touch. Maybe this is the book of the year. Seriously. Brad Balukjian, and I always hope I'm pronouncing that right. He says I've got it right. Hats off to you, man. What a job. Phew. I'm sorry I put this one off. It came out in April. I'm just getting around to reading it, and I'm like, why didn't you read this one sooner? You live and learn, right? So anyway, we'll get on our usual commercial announcements. Both the Outdated Wrestling Hour and the Outdated Entertainment Hour are productions of Bob Smith Podcasts. The Outdated Wrestling Hour is part of the WrestleCopia podcast network. All those great shows and me, I don't know how I got so lucky. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. All wrestling-related fun inquiries, if like you want to argue about who the best Intercontinental Champion was, write me there. Do not write me anywhere else but at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com for fun wrestling talk. I am trying to keep my Facebook direct messages business related if I can possibly do that. It ain't working. The thing fills up with, who's your favorite Intercontinental Champion? I just can't. All right, seriously. I'm not standoffish. I will talk to you. I promise. Talk to me on Gmail though, because there I have the room and there I'll have the time. All right, fair enough. Shake my hand. I pull it back like Ric Flair. Anyway, find me on Facebook. I'm the one singing with Baby King. I'm also on Outdated Bob on Threads, and I believe I'm that name also on what used to be Twitter or X or whatever it's called. But my main jam is Facebook. It's just my main jam. I know so many people there. You know what I'm saying? In any event, we'll be back next week. I'm really hoping to have some more fun with all of you. We got some great guests lined up. Stick with us, will you? We're having a nice time. We hope you are too. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I'm Bob Smith. I was lucky enough to work with the London Magazine Company in Rockville Center, New York, publishing Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, Sports Review Wrestling, Inside Wrestling, Wrestle America, Wrestling Superstars, Wrestling on a Stick, Skillet Cooked Wrestling. I think I screwed up a couple of those titles. But in any event, I hope we bring back memories. The idea of this show is to have a little fun and give a little tribute to the stuff we used to enjoy and still do when we get a chance to see it. That's it. I'm not here for no locker room scuttlebutt, no rumors, no put downs, and not a lot of cursing if I can avoid it. I want to relax and have a little fun in my golden years, you know what I'm saying? Not quite my golden years yet. I'm certainly heading in that direction. So as I sit here and have a nice cup of tea, my name is Bob Smith. Join us again next week. And as Ringo Starr of the Beatles says, peace and love to the world. I'll buy that.